1999, Morpheus offered Neo a choice between a red pill and a blue pill. In 2018, this country fractured between red and blue. In 2022, I'm here to tell you that if you really want the truth, more voters are neither red or blue. Yet, they have no representation, no choice, and no options. They have to choose between candidates chosen by the red people or the blue people. I'm David Esrati, and I'm running for Congress as an American, as in red, white, and blue. I'm a veteran, an activist, and a small businessman. I'm asking you to join me in reminding the professional politicians in Congress who their bosses are. I support ranked choice voting, campaign finance reform, and a verified voter information system, all so we can stop having the best politicians money can buy. It's time to elect a veteran who will work for you, no matter what color they want to label you. Please go to electesrati.com and learn more. I'm David Esrati, and I approve this message. In Jurassic Park, you thought those little baby dinosaurs were cute until they turned into out-of-control carnivores. That's sort of what happens to government when we elect people based on very expensive advertising campaigns and propaganda. I'm David Esrati. I'm a veteran and a small businessman running for Congress. You don't want professional ad people and pollsters to sway your vote. All those hot-button issues like gun control, abortion, borders are all politicized to stop you from voting rationally. And thinking rationally seems to be in short supply these days. Most Americans have been voting against their own best self-interest for a long time because we've allowed money to buy our leaders. 1 million Americans died in the last 2 years because our leaders couldn't lead. It wasn't that hard. Mask, distance, test, and then vaccinate. In an instant, we had billions to spend on healthcare for COVID, when for years we've been told we can't provide healthcare for everyone equally in this country. That's an unintended consequence of the pandemic. If you think about it, our government can pretty much do whatever it wants, or what the people who buy our politicians tell our leaders to do. We also had a ton of money to prop up businesses. The next thing you know, it turns out that a living wage was not only possible, but necessary. As a small businessman who won't sell you out to corporate interests and lobbyists, I can tell you that it's time to fully understand the consequences of companies like Amazon, Facebook, and Google and their effect on small business, and to remind you that small business is the #1 creator of jobs in this country. So this next election, don't trust this ad or any other political ad. Do your homework and think before you vote. It's time to put this ad man in Congress because I know that the best advertising is based on the truth, not the size of the budget or payola. Or you can just vote based on who has the money to buy their way into Congress and live with the consequences. I'm David Esrati, and I approve this message. Hi, I'm David Esrati. I'm the candidate for Congress in OH-10, that's Montgomery County, Greene County, and parts of Clark County. And I don't see any viewers on here yet, but I hope some of you join me in this discussion about universal basic income. Not saying it's a solution, but I want to talk about what Andrew Yang was talking about, partially because we never got a chance to actually vote for Andrew Yang by the time we got to the primaries in Ohio. In fact, we didn't get any choice in the primaries in Ohio by the time we got to vote. That's a major problem. If you shut down voices in a democracy, is it really a democracy? That's why we need to have either one election, ranked choice voting, or we got to have all the primaries on the same day. I don't care what people in Iowa or in New Hampshire think of candidates. I care what people in Ohio think about candidates. And right now, I'm your candidate. There are no other choices. It's me or the incumbent, Mike Turner. So, what are we talking? Why am I talking about universal basic income? Well, The concept of universal basic income, when Andrew Yang was talking about it, seemed absolutely impossible. The idea of giving every adult X, every child Y, and making sure they had the basic money that they would need to survive. And there are pros and cons to this, because if you do it to everybody, that means why are you giving it to the rich people? And if you're doing it to the poor people, aren't they paying taxes to support it? So it's kind of a blunt hammer, but so is raising the interest rates 0.75% on everybody in this country. And we didn't seem to have a problem doing that. So what would it cost? It's hard to say, but a couple trillion a year. That's a lot of money. We spend a lot of money on other things, okay? And that's where economists get real fuzzy, okay? So let's talk about defense. We spend $800 billion a year. Or do we? Because we're also spending money on foreign aid, we're spending money on supporting Ukraine, we're spending money on all kinds of other things. So is that number of 800 billion really the amount we spend on defense? How much do we spend, as part of NATO? How much do we spend all kinds of other ways? Then we have to look at how much do we spend to keep a whole bunch of people incarcerated. A couple million people a year in the United States are permanently behind bars. That costs a lot. Why are they there? Well, they needed money for stuff and they couldn't find it, so they stole it or they broke laws. Realistically, the major reason we should have people in prison is because they're a menace or a danger to society. They're people who will kill other people. But that's not a majority of the people that are in prison. A majority of the people are in prison. Some of them are mentally ill. We don't fund health care for them all. But we do when they're in prison. It's sad that for some people in the prison industrial system, being in prison is the only place where they get 3 hots and a cot. Otherwise, they're homeless and mentally ill and not getting treated at all. So, if we gave them all a universal basic income, would we keep more of them out of prison? Would more of them complete schools? Studies say, kids who have food security, a roof over their heads, they do better in school. Imagine that. So I said, when Yang was talking about it, we didn't believe it could happen. But what happened during the pandemic? All of a sudden, we were handing out money to everybody. And some people say, well, that's why we have inflation now. But even if you're a really bad economist and you only get the very basics of it, the reality is if you give poor people $1,000 and you give a rich person $1,000, what they do with it is totally different. Totally different. A poor person goes out and spends it on fuel, food, clothing, housing. Now, if they're dumbasses, they spend it on, or they have a drug problem, they spend it on drugs, yeah. Or they might spend it on gambling. We have lotteries run by the state, so it must be a good idea. Or they spend it on alcohol. That's legal too. But in general, most people, when given the money, act somewhat responsible and spend it on goods and services, usually on the local level. And every dollar they spend there gets recirculated at a faster rate in the local economy, making everybody better off. What's the rich person do with it? Well, they go out and they either spend it on luxury goods, or they blow it on something they don't really need, or they invest it in the stock market where the gyrations of it have an effect on all of us because our pensions are tied up in it. Everything else is tied up in it because we've allowed Wall Street to act as our alternative to federally running our economy. Since the 80s, we've deregulated banks. We've allowed them to become investment houses. We've deregulated insurance companies, allowing them to operate across state lines. We've done all these things that Republicans wanted that were, quote, good for business, but turned out to be bad for the little guys. So we got these huge conglomerate businesses like the Wall Street bankers and the Wall Street insurance company, the abbreviation is FIRE. Finance, insurance, real estate. Those are the core groups that people pump their money into when they're extremely wealthy, and they can cause inflation too. But we don't hold those organizations accountable. We refuse to. We don't want to, because those people have lots of excess money, and what do they do with some of their money? They buy politicians. Again, in 2020, $15 billion for federal offices. So, during the pandemic, we gave people money. What'd they do? They spent it. And the economy didn't go off into the deep end the way people thought it would. Now, there are a lot of landlords that got stuck on rent, and there's a lot of houses that are now going into foreclosure because people couldn't make payments while their jobs disappeared. But in general, the money handed out to the citizens got spent in the right places, and it circulated, and it kept our economy going. So, do we want a universal basic income? I don't know. I don't see any of you asking any questions or putting in your 2 cents. I'd love it if you did. But the other thing you have to think about is we spend an awful lot of money doing things like aid to dependent children or food stamps or all these other programs, which we could basically do away with a universal basic income. We could stop all that craziness of filing for it, being held accountable for it, making it, checking on people to see if they did everything right, regulating it, or hands off and hand them the money and let them do what they do. Now, one other thing that is a thought to think about is what happens if one of the penalties for committing crimes against others is that your universal basic income goes away for the rest of your life. Is that worth it? You want to earn it back? Maybe you have to go in the military and earn it back. Maybe there's other public service things that you could do to earn it back. But obviously, prison as a punishment hasn't been working to cut crime or solve our problems. So, universal basic income. Should we be talking about it in 2022? Should we be talking about it in 2024? I'd love to hear what you think. I'd also like to hear what your solutions are, because right now the system that we have is failing a lot of Americans. 1 in 5 or 1 in 6, depending where you are food insecure. We have an awful lot of people that are homeless. They're living paycheck to paycheck, that don't have more than $400 in the bank account for an emergency or something that comes up, that are overextended on credit, have huge amounts of student debt. We've talked about removing student debt. That's been discussed. There's been all kinds of things talked about. But what solutions do we have? Because the Fed raising interest rates 0.75% and jamming all of us up obviously isn't the only tool in the box that we can go to. We just aren't thinking about the rest of them. All right, so I don't see any questions. I thank you for watching. I really appreciate you tuning in. And I do see that some of these episodes get more viewers, some do get less. So tell me what you want to talk about. Put it in the comments of this one. Put it in the comments of another one. I see all the comments. If you want to hear about something, ask. The other thing is, please share these or talk about them if you so choose, and subscribe and hit the little notify bell so you know when we go online right away. My idea of doing this is to continue this once I get elected. At the end of every day in Congress, to tell you what I did, why I did it, what happened, what it means for you. That's totally different than Mike Turner, who's never had a town hall once to hear from you. Heard a rumor he was in town yesterday talking about how he was going to make it easier for doctors to provide Suboxone for addicts. Well, that's just great. All of a sudden, Mike's pro-healthcare and wants to help doctors. He doesn't want to help them solve the problem of very high insulin prices. He voted against the Affordable Insulin Act. He doesn't want to make sure that if you have an ectopic pregnancy that you can get an abortion, or if you were raped or incest, an abortion. No, he's not for that either. But he's all about trying to make it easier to provide expensive drugs to addicts to get them, so that give them something to fall back on, and avoid their habits. He wants you to buy the corporate drugs, not the street drugs. Gee, thanks, Mike Turner. You're such a humanitarian. And while you're at it, send some more money to Ukraine and buy us some more M1A1 tanks and the C-27 that the Air Force didn't want, and put more money in that F-35 program, because that's what Americans really need. I'm David Esrati. I'll be back here at 4 o'clock tomorrow. I'll be here at 4 o'clock every day, Monday through Friday. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.